Hi, I'm John Bandler, and I'm answering some questions on cyberlaw and my Cyberlaw book. I'm helping out a course that I built, but I'm not teaching it, and some students have questions. The professor forwarded it to me. I think they're covering Chapter 33, Artificial Intelligence, and maybe Chapter 34, where we kind of walk through some data laws comprehensively, because we break up data law. We talk about cybersecurity law, breach notification law, privacy law, not in that order, by the way. And then Chapter 34 talks about it all. Remember, laws all around us, laws for everyone, cyber laws for everyone. These are quick and off the cuff answers. So you gotta forgive me for any mistakes I might make. And when I build a course in a written assignment, the last question on the assignment invites a question from the student. Remember, this is the structure of the book, and we're covering data law now. We lay a great foundation. So in this book, you don't need a foundation in law or cyber to understand what the book is covering about cyber law. Don't forget those chapter resource pages. I'll show you some. We have resources pages for every single chapter, and I'm going to show you one of them because there's a question about it. Some disclaimers. I might make a mistake, and I like to give my opinion too. So first question says, there's a resource link from the book that's broken. They go on to give the link, the URL, the page, and it's broken. So I appreciate when people point that out. I want to mention, though, and I kind of felt this was going to happen as I wrote the book, that a lot of the links from the prior administration would go bad. And this is why you want to go to that chapter resource page, and I'm going to show you it. And that's why I built these chapter resource pages. So here's the chapter resource page for Chapter 33 on artificial intelligence. And remember, in the book, I mention, especially with a lot of these developing areas of law, I say, do your research, check my chapter resource page. Here are some updated links, because those executive orders I cited in the book, they no longer work. And I think that's one thing that's different from this current administration compared to prior ones, is they really undid pretty much every executive order from the prior administration, and they also kind of wiped them off the website too. So these original links no longer work, but under the Biden White House, they were emphasizing, you see, they had a Bill of Rights. They were emphasizing safety, privacy, protection from these AI systems having too much power or control, protection from, I guess, these tech companies too having too much power and control. But if you look at the Trump AI executive orders, obviously they reversed what the Biden White House did, and they're not emphasizing consumer privacy or safety. They're kind of emphasizing full steam ahead. Don't let anything slow us down. And if you go to the website, you can kind of see the slant of it and what they're trying to say. So as you think about those changes in the executive branch, one thing to think about is why that change, why such a big change. And the current administration is doing things, making tremendous changes and acting in ways we have not seen in this country to my recollection, and I'm 55 years old. We also want to look at where money is coming from. That ties into another question too. But this executive branch government is clearly very tech friendly. It's also received a lot of money in donations from tech companies too. Okay, we have a bunch of AI questions. One question I have is about future AI regulations, by which I think you mean future AI laws and regulations, statutes and regulations. Do you think governments will eventually create a single comprehensive AI law, or will they continue adapting existing laws to address AI issues? So remember, law is about words and what words mean. So I am going to parse the words of the question do you think governments? What do you mean by governments? Now let's keep it focused on U.S. law, and then we can think about what that means, governments. Well, we want to look at the federal government and what they might do, and we want to look at the state governments and what they might do. The federal executive branch, I think, recently put something out saying states should not regulate AI companies, that states should not get involved, and it should just be for the federal government. The thing is, we don't know what future laws might be. They might be very favorable for AI companies and tech companies, or they might be more restrictive and pose more obligations in the interests of safety, consumer privacy, all those other concerns that people have with AI. So what will happen? This is part of the government process and the political process. It's hard to predict. It's hard to know which side will get the law that's better for them. Yeah, it's tough to know. I mean, certainly something more specific is needed, because this is a lot of this is new. Given that the U.S. follows a sectoral privacy model with no comprehensive federal law, do you think the rapid rise of AI makes a single overarching federal privacy law is more necessary now than ever before? Again, this ties into what I'm talking about before, and a recurring theme through the book, and we talked about this last edition also. There's no guarantee that the new law, everybody's going to like it. In fact, people are not going to like it. Just like people disagree with the existing law, when there's a new law, people are going to disagree about it. And to get to that law, a lot of people are going to argue about it, fight about it, lobby about it. Millions of dollars, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent by certain companies to try get a law that's favorable for them. So I don't want to say an overarching federal privacy law is necessary, because if it ends up being a very weak federal law, that wouldn't be a necessary law. That would be a unnecessary law that harms consumer privacy. Do you follow what I'm saying? So the worry today is that if an overarching federal privacy law is passed, that it would benefit the tech companies, be a detriment to consumer privacy, and possibly even mean that state privacy laws are weakened or even eliminated, right? There's that doctrine of preemption we talked about earlier in the book, where certain federal laws could preempt a state law and tell the state, no, you cannot legislate and enforce in this area because the federal law preempts your state law. It's a tricky issue, right? Another question, similar lines. What I keep coming back to is how unpredictable AI development feels. It's already being used in so many areas, and I think that creates situations we haven't fully dealt with before. It makes me curious how society will decide what's acceptable use and who should be accountable when things go wrong. Yep, and this is the tough area of what law does and what law cannot do, and then what other parts of society have to decide. And we talk about that in chapter 36 in connection with speech, and how law can only do certain things in the area of speech, but broader society outside of law has to make other decisions. So yes, we're going to need some responsible laws in AI, but also forget about law. Others in society need to make decisions. This includes education too, right? There may not be a law that says how to use AI in education, but some educators and students may say, hey, this AI is harmful. I want to choose how we use it, whatever a law might say or not say. More AI, I think this topic really highlights how fast technology is moving compared to the law. It seems like a lot of AI issues can still fit under existing laws like tort or privacy, but there are gray areas, especially when it comes to accountability and automated decisions. I feel like we might be okay using current laws for now, but eventually we'll probably need more specific rules as AI keeps evolving. Yeah, that's a fair point. First, we look to existing laws and how they apply. And next, we look at whether we need new laws. And it does seem we do need some new laws. But before we just say, oh, laws slow, we need faster laws or new laws, we do have to understand what are the current laws, how do they apply to some of the new things that are happening. Question, what do you think is more concerning? What AI can become if not properly regulated, or the fact that most AI development companies seem to be more focused on making money than product safety? Any country, a nation, a law, a democracy needs some degree of regulation, right? You need some degree of protection. We're in a capitalist economy. For-profit companies, it is their business model to make money. Like, that is what makes them work. There's nothing evil about that. That's what capitalism is. It works very well, but it can't be unrestricted capitalism, because then some companies, a lot of companies, or probably almost all companies, would be irresponsible. So we need responsible laws and regulations that they need to comply with. So yes, they need to make money, but yes, they need to be concerned with product safety, and a lot of companies will not be sufficiently concerned with product safety unless there are laws that tell them that they need to. So we do need responsible regulation. Given the rise of AI systems capable of creating emotional and psychological attachment, are current legal frameworks sufficient? See, I'm not a fan of this phrase, legal frameworks, and I see it a lot. So let's just talk about laws and regulations, or just laws. Are current laws and regulations sufficient to address the harms that may result from such interactions? Furthermore, in light of recent U.S. jury decisions holding platforms like Meta and Google liable for negligence and addiction-related harm, should these rulings serve as a guiding framework for developing laws that regulate the emotional and psychological impacts of AI systems? I guess first thing I'd say is you don't want to make laws or policies based on one jury verdict. So let's just step back and we'll remember that a jury verdict is based on the facts of that case and based on existing laws applied in that case. So to get to that jury verdict, there was years of litigation. The lawsuit, the civil lawsuit, was under existing laws. And I think this lawsuit you're talking about is in California state court. It involved, I think, one individual who said they were harmed by Meta and Google. So that's one case. We don't want to read too much into that one case, but the question's still valid, which is, should there be laws specifically, statutes specifically requiring these social media companies and AI companies to make sure their tools are not overly addictive? Because I think it's clear that they try to hook people in so that they're endlessly scrolling, because that's what gives them ad revenue and learning more about people, and that's how they make their money. So should we have statutes and regulations on that? Now, there's another case where Meta had to pay $375 million based on a New Mexico state court case, misleading over child safety, brought by the New Mexico State Attorney General, sort of under unfair and deceptive trade practices state statute, which we covered, which, not the New Mexico one, but it's similar to the FTC Act. So those are under existing laws, and yes, we can ask, should we have more specific laws to try to prevent those kinds of harms? Fair question. Question, do you believe the marketing hype in quotes with AI, as in, is it justified or a little exaggerated? Now, you can probably tell by now I am an AI skeptic. So I do know it's powerful. I do know it can get you certain answers quickly. So I'm not minimizing that. But I do think it has been hyped. And I also think people are not putting enough emphasis on the bad parts of it, the dangers of it. And where does that hype come from? Well, some of that hype is honest hype, right? There's a person who's like, oh, this is great. I love it. I'm going to talk about how great it is. But we've got to be realistic and realize a lot of that hype is not honest hype. It's paid hype. So how many billions of dollars have been put into AI, investing in it? For every $1 billion spent, they're probably spending $1 million, and I'm making up that ratio, but they're spending a lot of money to hype it. And hype is not just advertising. Hype is a lot of the stuff you see in social media. Influencers, whoever else, they might not disclose they're getting paid, and the way they're being compensated may not be as, it's not transparent. So lots of money has been put into AI, and they need to make it work because their money's in it. I think a lot of businesses have bought into AI to use it, and I feel like a lot are going to regret it. I think a lot of educators have bought the hype, and I think they may regret it. And it might take a couple years or 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, but eventually I think people are going to look and say, a lot of this is a mistake. These ed tech companies have been pushing it, and the ed tech companies, they have a motive, and their motive is not necessarily education. I think a lot of students have bought the hype, and students thinking, oh, this is great. It's really shrinking the time it takes me to write this paper, do the research, do the assignment. So students are buying into this hype that they're getting educated by using these tools. And I worry a lot of students are eventually going to say, you know what happened to my high school education, my college education, my graduate school education? I spent a lot of money and time to get that degree, but I used these AI tools, and I'm not sure I got an education because I couldn't tell you much from the courses I took. So you let me know what you think about that in the comments. All right, this is similar to a question from last week. One question I have is how courts will continue to define reasonable security as technology is evolving. Do you think industry frameworks like NIST will play a stronger role in shaping legal standards in future cases? All right, so before talking about how courts define it, we need to talk about how the statute or the regulation defines it, right? So think back to our chapter on cybersecurity and think, I guess chapter 34 sums them up a little too. But first look to the statute, because the court, the judge in the court, before that judge starts interpreting what reasonable security means, that judge is going to look at what the statute or regulation says about it. And as we covered, the statute and regulations, a lot of them are drawn from or similar to a lot of those best practices that cybersecurity professionals are familiar with. A lot of those best practices existed in cybersecurity frameworks before laws. Yes, cybersecurity frameworks play a role. That's why I touch on them in the cybersecurity chapter and the privacy chapter. I touch on them in that preview section before we start talking about the laws. And reasonable is a term that, is open to interpretation by juries and judges. So to try to figure out what's reasonable under the circumstances, you look to see what are the circumstances, the facts of that case, that event, and you look to see what are the best practices. If I were to apply to a job now with just the background of what I've been learning at school, what job would you recommend for a beginning to start at? That's also similar to a question from last week. If it's just what you're learning at school, I hope you're learning a lot at school, getting to know your professors. Maybe there's internship, externship opportunities, career center. Remember, I got this tips for a career in cyber video. I'll put a link in the description. I don't know you personally. Maybe your professor knows you a little bit more and what's right for you and how to improve your chances. But I think you're studying information technology or information systems or information security. So, like I talk about, build your knowledge and knowledge in a lot of diverse areas. Build your skills, your ability to research, investigate, read, think, write, edit, speak, present. You got to network and research the career opportunities. I think LinkedIn is very helpful for that. I have another video on using LinkedIn. Certifications can help too. And talk to your professors and career counselor. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If I answered your question, make sure you let your professor know. Let your professor know you watched this. All references will be in the video description. The usual disclaimers. Thanks for watching. Take care.